Tens of millions of American citizens will be going to the polls today for the country's tightly contested presidential election. A two-horse race between Vice President Kamala Harris and ex-President Donald Trump. Over 70 million Americans have already cast their votes in what will be one of the most consequential elections in recent American history. Vice President Kamala Harris projected the confidence. Our campaign is thrilling at the penultimate event of our presidential run, telling an audience in Pittsburgh that the momentum is on their side. Her remarks were notably short in Pittsburgh, where she spoke for under 10 minutes. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump made his final pitch in Pittsburgh to voters in the same parts of Pennsylvania as his opponent. Trump delivered what his campaign aides described as his closing argument after his previous attempt was derailed by crude and racist jokes. Trump appeared to be growing wistful as he wrapped up his campaign, calling it sad that he was holding his final campaign rallies ever. Joining us now on this show for an analysis on today's election is Dr. Sam Amadi, the director of the Abuja School of Social and Political Thought, and Dr. Victor Okhai, public affairs analyst and president, Directors Guild of Nigeria. Good morning, gentlemen, and thank you for joining us on U.S. Election Day.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, okay. I don't know whether Dr. Amadi is there in Abuja. Okay, he's right there in the studio in Abuja.
Thank you.
Good morning, good morning. Great Malabite. Welcome to the show. Very quickly, gentlemen, just your take on the American election. We've done the introduction. We've done our own analysis here. What do you think? Let's start with you here in Lagos.
Okay, so the beauty of this election is it's not very clear where it can swing both ways. We find that both candidates are neck to neck, and on a daily basis, the polls are going up and down one way or the other in favor of one candidate or the other. And the issues that are at stake here are much more than we have ever seen, especially issues like immigration, abortion rights, and the rest. This is going to be an issues-based election, and will determine to a very large extent how Americans are thinking. You can't rule out the race issues as well, and so to a very large extent, it's going to determine to what extent it's going to go on. So, which is why, as unpopular as, I use the word unpopular, maybe among certain demographics, as Trump may appear, he's still a very strong force, because there are those who probably want to, maintain the status quo as it is. They want to, as it says, make America great again, or they want back the America. But on the other hand, for immigrants, and especially blacks, this election poses existential threats to a lot of them. You find a situation where immigrants are feeling threatened. I know people who are already American citizens, blacks, some of African descent and all that, who are friends of mine, who are saying if Trump wins, they're going back home. And they're doing everything possible to make sure that they win votes for Kamala Harris. Of course, as you know, Trump has promised that if he wins, you're going to get the biggest deportation ever. So, like I said, this poses an existential threat for immigrants and their families. So these are the issues that were there. But as we were saying before we came on air, elections are very unpredictable. It's not usually the most popular candidate, quote unquote. When I say popular, not the most liked candidate. It's usually how people feel that determines at the end of the day how the elections go.
Well, Dr. Amadi, your take?
Well, I think I agree with him. There are going to be three aspects. One is to say this election showcases the merit of the virtues of democracy, as they put it, which is that we see intensity, we see that in spite of politicians double speak, but whatever, everybody's trying to speak to that little Joe in the crowd. Last night we saw Kamala Harris, go knocking at the door. We've seen candidates, tailor messaging, pay attention to nuances, to how very little groups feel about either comments made or about situations. So that reinforces the idea of democracy as responsiveness, as Professor Dahl and others have said. So that's the merit of this election, that we are seeing intensity, hopefully voter turnout to be perhaps reaching to the Obama period or even more. That's fine. The downside of this is that we've seen the American democracy and American society wobble. I mean, Alexis Tocqueville, many centuries ago, wrote the famous book, Democracy in America. And one of the things he said, look, no sooner had political crisis risen in America that it becomes a legal crisis. So the American system transmutes political crisis to legal crisis. Now you're talking about, for example, Trump team deploying about 500 lawyers to each battleground states, see litigation tied up here and there. We've seen even last night judgment on Elon Musk, innovative, some would say perhaps a little shade of illegal or whatever, effort to boost voter turnout for his candidate. That's going to plenty litigation and uncertainty at the lowest level. County boards make decisions. So it tells a story also around a political system that is so polarized, as well as a system where at the end of the day, it's not just democracy that wins. It might be the guy with the best legal skills. It might be the team with the best organizational system. So we also see that America is posed in a way that the bitterness, the name-calling, I mean, if you listen to the way I look at the U.S. media, is that too much shallowness and too much, people slandering each other. And whoever is going to be the president after today will be either a communist or a fascist. So the American brand is terribly eroded. And it's a collective action. The U.S. people have worked so hard to divide themselves and to demonize the other half. Again, back to who wins. I'll borrow what Ian Bremmer, the notable analyst, talked about. He says, look, the intellect suggests Trump might win for two clear reasons. One is that when you have about 70%, job disapproval for incumbent government, even though Kamala wasn't the president but vice president, but the administration, if you have that kind of number, it takes Trump self-destructing not to win the election. So that's one parameter that says, well, if you look at what the people feel about the current government, it might be Trump's election to lose. But again, also if you look at the fact that the voter turnout, resistance voter turnout, Democrats, Republicans have done better than they've done in the past in early voting. Some suggest it might be that they might have less turnout in the election day voting, but those numbers suggest some perhaps some better outcome tonight or in this election. But again, the reverse of it is that Trump's messaging has been very undisciplined. His team is great. His campaign team is good. Their ads are top notch. But his bellicosity, his unguarded moments, his being Trump could turn off some voters. So again, Kamala has done great groundwork, and even though not well defined as who she is, and can't escape the fact that the last 4 years on the whole has been a bad 4 years in terms of. So it comes back to,
Amadi,
would the people respond to, are you better off? Are you better off now? Yeah.
Are you better off now?
So it comes down to, would they say, are you better off now? Or
exactly.
Or,
yeah. On that note, I really do want to bring the conversation back home because, of course, we know geopolitics has got a major impact, and both sides have their own pros and cons. We're looking at, will the Russia-Ukraine war come to an end? How does this affect Africa? Of course, we know what happened to food prices when this war started. Of course, there's another war happening in the Middle East as well. So there's a lot of geopolitical factors, relationships with China. As African countries, we have relationships with China, with Russia, and so forth. Will we be punished for that? So my question to you, really, and I'll ask the same question to Dr. Victor as well here in the studio, but first to you, Dr. Amadi, which of these candidates do you think is better for Nigeria?
great question. First, let's take the last 4 years. What has been the President Biden's contribution to Nigeria? If you ask me, I'm in the policy space and the civil society space. Apart from the civil society things about election, I don't see much we've done. I was used to be a member of the British, Nigerian, American committee that looks at, intergovernmental relationship, what was in foreign affairs. But again, not much. Now, if you look at Trump 4 years, one could argue not much as well. So first, I would say that the African position, Nigerian position should be either whoever. I mean, what Kamara may do for us is in terms of maybe strengthening the idea of liberalization, liberal politics, maybe more concerned with issues like gender, which is good, maybe more concerned, we saw what happened with they bring back our girls, and Michelle Obama was very strong on that. So a Kamara presidency would put a lot of stress on, those kind of issues about gender, about democracy, but on a superficial level. Trump presidency would basically leave us alone. I mean, it's interesting that Trump still has a lot of supporters in Nigeria. And some people argue that, look, we want the guy who doesn't bother about us so that we can play our game with China. You mentioned China, for example. The U.S. under Biden are nervous about China. The U.S. under Trump maybe will be nervous, but they might take the view that, look, leave these countries alone, America for America. So in a sense, some people think maybe, in a sort of counterintuitive manner, a mega America for America could allow Africa that space to plot its destiny. For too long, we've been operated as an appendage, and oftentimes the Western interventions have confused and disoriented Africa. So I would argue, yes, look at the China crisis, the two parties are strong on the same anti-China position. It's when you get to China, Russia, Ukraine, that's a difference. And the argument policy people are saying that Trump will likely bring a resolution, but it might be resolved in a way that exposes Europe, that enables Russia. Some will argue perhaps it will force Ukraine to a shameful surrender. Other people argue that, look, this war is perhaps necessary and fueled by a sense of these narratives around Russia is evil, so we need to contain Russia. So if you see a narrative that says, let Russia be, let's contain Russia instead of going against Russia, maybe we pull back from the precipice. And look, this war is a bad war. We thought that would have been open and closed. It's still raging. It's not good for anybody. Israel, Palestine, that's the problem. So I think that either way, Africans' position should be whoever wins. It's difficult to say what benefits us at this point with American foreign policy, which is basically cosmetic and not deeply rooted. Yeah.
Quite an interesting take, Dr. Victor, very quickly. And I also just want to note that none of these candidates have actually mentioned Africa in any of their campaigns.
Exactly. Quite frankly, I think right now where the focus is in America. And if you ask me of the two candidates, and I'm trying to speak a bit dispassionately here, they have both been in government. I mean, Kamala, even as vice president, but that's one team. And then there's Trump on the other hand. Trump tends to be more liberal in his approach with countries like China, Russia, and even North Korea. And for him, and I think for him, what is most important is America. He's more focused on the U.S. He's not as bothered as others seem to be with what happens in other areas. So a Trump presidency, what I think it will do for us is give us an opportunity for growth, because then we can then look at where our priorities are. If it is working with China, if it's working with Russia, a Trump, for instance, couldn't be bothered, and we're not going to be necessarily punished for it. So I see for me personally in that regard, I mean maybe different in other areas, but in that regard, I think a Trump presidency will be more favored. I mean, Africa will be more favored, and especially Nigeria, I would say. Kamala, if we see what she did, and permit me to also make references with what's her name, Kemi Badenoch. People like that tend to be rather extreme when they get into government, and in their views and all that. They want to please, they want to show that, they want to move as far away from their people as possible. Obama didn't do much for us. using that as an example, for instance, he didn't do too much for us. We all thought that an Obama presidency would be great for Africa. I doubt that it was great for any country in Africa. Not even Kenya can say that they greatly benefited. Yes, he visited, but I mean, that was all there really was to it. So I think that a Trump presidency will be better for us. Kamala couldn't be bothered whatever happens in Africa.
Really? I mean,
that's my view.
And I said really because of this. Because when you were enunciating your view, you said something I totally disagree with. You said Trump will not care about China. Are you watching the tariffs? Are you watching the conditionality of the tariffs he's going to put against China? Are you watching about the trade wars that's going to happen between him and China? So I'm surprised that you say he's not going to care about China.
Okay.
Real quickly.
Yeah.
I've been reading a book, very interesting book. It's called War by Bob Woodward. Okay. And I think it's a read everybody should get. And we all know Bob Woodward from his days of the Nixon, scandal, Watergate and everything. And one thing he kept on saying, and this is in terms of geopolitics, and this is to Mr. Amadi, Dr. Sam Amadi first, was the fact that Biden felt that there was a need for this war because Obama was soft on Russia when he took over Crimea many years ago. So Trump going against the grain of this war, not supporting Ukraine, is not going to be a disastrous policy, geopolitical policy, because for the first time now we know that Russia doesn't even have a great army. We know how fickle Putin is with his military. We know that he's not that might. And this capacity for America to take him off for the very first time showed a lot of lapses. This was the same Putin that in 2 weeks said he was going to march on Ukraine and kill Zelensky. That's my question to you. So Trump coming with that approach is not going to be dastardly for America and the world now that we've been able to solve the problem of Putin, as it were, now. Coming to you, I would like to ask about, nationalism and this politics of rage that Trump is preaching, and how it seeps into the African continent. Are you saying that a man that called Nigeria a whole country is good for Nigeria? A man that will be very protectionist in his approach. A man that at some point we were scared that he was going to renounce AGOA. In fact, he called for a renegotiation of AGOA. There was a possibility he was going to scrap AGOA, African Growth and Opportunity Act, before we finally sailed through, which is one thing, apart from PEPFAR, that the Americans have done for us in a while. A man that doesn't even consider the black world as a partner in everywhere. Do you think, again, that that's going to be good for us? I'll come to Dr. Sam Amadi first as regards my geopolitics question. I'll come to you afterwards.
Okay, thank you. A little question. Let me start with the last part of it. Interestingly, I believe in the national economy. I'm not a fan of so-called global economy. Why do I say so? The global economy is basically national economies in competitive situation. And so my reading from Frederick List to Yagu Chan, every scholar, is that the focus of growth is a national economy. So I think if I was Trump, really, I would also think about not in the nationalism in terms of the nation with all the cultural baggage, the favor of we the elect and special people, but nationalism in the sense of a state-based wealth focus. It focuses on your country. And that's why the notion of tariffs that is bringing about, deployed by many scholars, many economists, but essentially the idea is if the economics is good, if U.S. has a population, the consuming public, the middle class that can consume, then a tariff might actually instigate reallocation, redistribution of productive forces and productivity. So you can see more industries coming up. But that's, for us, Nigeria, you see, the problem is this. Trump is trash talking, yes, people say. And that's part of what is making this election tight. I mean, by now, a guy who has been convicted for this, a guy who has been persecuted, many cases against him, the point that people understand him. And when he governed the last 4 years, he governed much more reasonably. He governed more tolerant. His speeches do not necessarily reflect in policy. And there's nothing Trump did to damage us or to help us. My view is this, that Africa needs to pull away a little bit from this euphoria of liberal, wokish arguments around, okay, we love Africa. No, don't love Africa. Keep the trading system fair, allow us to go back and create our own development. So yes, I know it's counterintuitive. Trump is not good speaking. Trump probably doesn't love us. Probably they say it's a racist. I don't know. I think most people in the world today are racist, whether black or white. But the key point for me would be, what does Trump stand on issue? So if Trump is going to allow you, for example, to, as a shithole country, to engage with China, to maximize your opportunity, to create your own wealth, and not destabilize you with wars or with proxy wars or some, discrete maneuvering to propose a certain social agenda that is not good for you. That's maybe fair. Now, back to the issue around the Ukraine issue. There are also other scholars who have argued that under the US, former UK Prime Minister, that there was an escalation. Now, you're right. If Biden felt Obama didn't manage Crimea well, and he wants to now assert the globalist liberal internationalism, which is to say, okay, you go and provoke them, we have to sign Ukraine. Many scholars have argued, including Sachs, that there was an agreement, there was a certain agreement to keep the peace. The post-war peace was to allow Russia some dignity. Don't forget that the First World War, after the First War, the inequitable settlement of that First World War created the crisis, the loss of confidence, the anger that made Hitler right on that. So some people have two views of the global entity. We say we want fair, just relationship. So Russia, yes, you want to push Russia down, but at the same time, don't push Russia down to the point where you provoke Russia to fight to end. And you have a strong man, a dirty guy, a strong man, if you like, whatever you input it. So the question is, would Trump really create an environment for a negotiated end that does not further empower Russia to invade other countries, but at the same time gives Russia a sense of justice and fairness? And you see the reconfiguration of the global order. You see the BRICS countries, you see the several things happening. So my argument would be, I don't like Trump as a person. At the same time, I don't think I like Kamala. If I was the US person, I would vote perhaps more on policy than on favorability. Again, if you look at the profile of voters, what they say, some people care more about policy. Some people care more about the person. We want to move away from the chaos. Some people say, look, we want to get back to the days where inflation is low, where the economy is booming, and we want to have stability in the world. So these counter-narratives are also tied to ideological divides and perception and value systems. So at the end of the day, election in the US will be either a vote on policy. If it's policy, Trump maybe have the edge because this government has not delivered. If it's on personality, if it's on vibe, if it's on a sense of normality, who would I like to go to dinner with? Like somebody said, a personality contest, then Trump will lose. Again, this is the crisis. We might see a blowout for either for Harris or for Trump, or we might see a very tough election.
Can you hear me? So, Dr. Amadi, this government has not delivered. This government cut inflation from over 9% post-COVID to about 2% now. They've stopped interest rates. These governments have had record number of jobs. These governments are beginning to push back, on all the damage COVID caused to the economy. So when you say this government has not delivered, the economy has an all-time high. I'm not sure if you are checking the stock market, the Dow Jones, and a couple of other markets in America. So that narrative of these governments have not delivered sounds very Trumpian to me. It's not absolute in fact. So, but secondly, do you think...
It's not Trumpian. It's not Trumpian.
Do you think that a Trump that is fighting a Thucydides war with Russia in terms of trade supremacy and dominance, with China in terms of trade supremacy and dominance, will allow China to have allies in Africa? Do you think that will be accepted by American foreign policy?
Yes. No, yes, let me come to that very quickly. See, by the way, Trump and Biden are not far apart on policy with China. The U.S. has the first consensus, what they call the geopolitical narrative. They think that China is a threat, security, and economic. So the two parties are not far apart. But again, a trade war with China is part of looking inward, not externally. So the Americans are deploying tariffs to ensure that, because they're the market, to ensure that China, Chinese products China doesn't override them. For Africa, it doesn't follow that because you're fighting China on a trade war, you care about China's forage in Africa. I think they will most likely not care. They will probably care if that amounts to China's superiority in terms of geopolitical influence. But if it's in terms of China making more money, by helping Africa build infrastructure. Trump may care less or more. But back to the question around, performance. See, the Main Street and the Wall Street are not on the same page here. The stock market is rally, but if even the Harris team recognizes that they are dealing with inflation.
I gave you facts. Inflation has dropped from 9% to 2%. To 2.1%.
Where was it before COVID? COVID was an abnormality. It was still less than, this year they created only 12,000, the last quarter, 12,000 jobs, new jobs. It's still lower than it was. The Americans are not fools. The people are not stupid. No, you're wrong. They know that they are paying more for fuel, for energy. I'm giving you fact that the people are paying more. It has come down to COVID level. How about before COVID? COVID was an aberration globally. No, it was not. They admit that they have not done well economically. So you don't use COVID, use pre-COVID, because COVID is over.
Dr. Amadi, let me come to Dr. Okhai in the studio. As I was saying, the question I had for you was, about Trump and, the African continent in general, as it were. What's your take on that?
Okay, so first of all, let's start with the way Trump talks. Lots of times, Trump, I think, is someone who understands what people want, in the sense that if you look at white Americans and mostly the conservatives in the U.S., there's a certain way they want to maintain their society as it was. They are anti-immigrants, and in some of their ways of thinking and all that. And what Trump is really doing, if he appears fascist, if he appears racist and all that, he's just trying to reinforce the thoughts of this group of people so that he can maintain their votes. Now, and don't forget that the whites are a majority in the U.S. The blacks, as much as they may be loud, they're still not as many as the whites. So what Trump says, and I think Dr. Amadi made allusion to that as well, may be quite different from the policies that are actually implemented. For instance, I'm going to have the greatest mass deportation of immigrants. He says it, but he may not when it comes to implementation, because of course you have to go through a legal route, and there are the Democrats in the House and all the others who will either make sure that it happens or does not happen. Now, coming back to Africa, why I think that Trump's presidency is going to be more favorable, especially, let me use Nigeria as an example, is that for too long we have been reliant on let me talk about Africa in general, on foreign aid, donors and all that. And because of that, we don't even look inwards at the things that we have. Now, if a Trump presidency comes in, what does it do for us? He's going to focus mainly on America, which means that they don't have time for us at all. The AGOA you talked about, what have we benefited from? How have we taken advantage of it? It's been given to us on a platter. Has government promoted it? We have so many fashion designers. Our textile industries are practically dead in this country. Our fashion designers, how many are truly exporting to the U.S.? What are some of those? I mean, I'm using that aspect of the AGOA right now and we're saying to ourselves, yes, they may have wanted to cancel our but how have we benefited from this? Nothing. So I think what is in our best interest right now is to remain, if you like, to borrow the old term, non-aligned, and look at where our best interest is.
From AGOA.
No.
Lots of people are benefiting.
No, a few people, because if it is so obvious. No, see, we don't have the institutions to help us benefit.
Really?
Our textiles, for instance, the textile industry would have been the greatest beneficiary.
A lot of people are benefiting from AGOA. I'll just say that.
Okay, I'm not.
To both of you.
Yes.
To Dr. Okhai and Dr. Amadi.
Yes.
Each time there is an American election,
yes,
we witness a trend in Nigeria, whereby Nigerians will say, we are supporting Trump, we are supporting the other party, Kamala Harris. Now, I recall that during the Obama first coming, Nigerians were so obsessed with the American election that, in fact, corporate Nigeria contributed money to support Barack Obama. You said we didn't get anything from Barack Obama, but people contributed money here, even if there are laws about foreign, election funding, campaign funds.
So we didn't get.
Well, I don't know the details of what happened with the money.
Yes.
But now again, You have some Nigerians who are saying, oh, it is Kamala Harris.
Yes.
And then you have some people saying, oh, it is Donald Trump, including those who have no vote in the matter. We are facing a prospect now in Nigeria whereby in a few days' time, when the election is won and lost, don't be surprised if Nigerians come up with Ashwebi, family attires, and they will say they are celebrating the winner. Now, it's a psychological thing, I guess, despite the fact that we have Nigerian American community in the US. But of what value is that tendency which Pimbai referred to earlier on as some kind of Nollywood effect in Nigeria? Let's start with you, Dr. Okhai.
Okay, I think it's yes, it's an obsession that we have. You know, we tend to just. Who was it that won an election? I don't remember now where we had Ashwebi as well. I can't remember whether it was an election or whatever where we actually had Ashwebi. I know people right now, friends of mine and Nigerian Americans, who, I mean, they're doing fundraisers, they're mobilizing like crazy. Mobilizing like crazy. One said to me last night, he said, if Trump wins, all of us are leaving and we're coming back home. I mean, that's how crazy it is.
No, those are the ones
No,
in America.
for me,
I'm
yes.
talking about the ones
no,
here.
I'm coming to talk about the ones here. See, many of us are under the impression.
Afford to buy air tickets. They are losing sleep.
Yeah, so we tend to be influenced by what we're hearing, you know, and we tend to think all the rhetorics about Trump is bad, Trump, and I said, for us here, I said, what does that have to do with the price of bread in the market for me if illegal Nigerians or Africans are sent back home? Our best and our brightest, this is slavery 2.0. The first one was taken, when it was about bronze, we took all our strong people and went to develop the West. This time around, it is brains. And so our brightest and our best have been, you know, through visa lotteries and all of that, have been taken away. And I think that if anything like that happens at all, it just simply means that our brightest and our best will come back home. They'll join the politics here. They'll bring back money here. And I think it will be good for us as a country.
Well, Dr. Amadi, your take? Dr.
I
Amadi,
think you're right. I mean, first, yes, I'm there. Are you hearing me? Hello?
Yes.
Hello?
Go ahead. Yes.
Okay. I said the first thing for me is that the U.S. election is now like a global cultural fiesta. You saw people, video of clips of people in Japan, some Indonesia, Trumpian or Camara. So the U.S. unique role in the global politics as the sole superpower in terms of military might, maybe dual superpower in terms of economic might, means that everybody will care about who becomes president. But again, Nigerian obsession with this politics may also relate to the diasporic effect. The U.S. is one of our most important diaspora centers in the world in terms of remittances, in terms of cultural exchange, influences. Most of our either great musicians, artists, politicians, probably at some time had their time in the U.S. And are dual citizens, so there's increasing dual citizenship. So you can understand the obsession. But again, at a more popular level, it's really masks, maybe because it's interesting to watch American politics. It gives us a sense that somehow we are partaking in these very important processes. And again, the outcome matters. It may not matter in terms of how much comes to Nigeria or in terms of support or in terms of policy, but it matters how the global system is shaped. That's my concern. I would like, for example, a U.S. leadership of the world that allows for multiculturalism, for a sense in which people can carve their lives in a different way from the social agenda that seems to be very dominant now. I would like a new world order where the U.S. leads for now until anybody can challenge them, but that allows for cultural variations. And so this election is not just about the U.S., it's also about, you can see the trend with UK, with Kemi, our sister, and people are saying, oh, she's anti-immigration. Look, immigration I think for Africa, we should even not care much about migration, because the migration now is the best and brightest living, creating a very bad developmental effect on our continent. So these things matter for us as a political elite. But again, at the grassroots, it's all spectacle. And the Americans are able to script it well with their 24-hour news cycle, with all the rallies that don't speak to any serious issue, but create a sense of a room for outrage, for creativity, for color, for vibes, for music. Look at the array of stars from Nollywood, mostly endorsing camera, and some wrestlers, sportsmen, and some other radio hosts endorsing Trump. So it's really a spectacle that's enriching, entertaining, and Nigerians, like entertainment. So maybe it's part of our continuing our tradition of music, culture, art, and we'll find the U.S. election as the real deal. But unfortunately, it crowds out attention on our crisis as a people. No matter who gets to win today or declared in a couple of days to come, we're going to face the simple issue that we must construct a national economy. And that's really my concern, that all through history, you have to understand that economies are always in competitive situation, and therefore it's a zero-sum game in a sense. If you win, somebody loses, and your focus is to win and not to be carried away by the so-called global economy or global political space. It's always about a certain state's boundaries, and that's why for me, migration should be legal, should be within the control of states, and except for emergencies and humanitarian issues, we should continue with the Westphalian state order, which allows the sovereign to, in a democratic sense, to decide their future. And so it's going to be interesting how this is go down. After today, we'll see shutting down, and maybe the winner emerges, and hopefully there's no crisis and no violence. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I think the key takeaway is whoever wins, let's not forget to focus on what Nigeria will be bringing to the table. Dr. Victor Okhai, Dr. Sam Amadi, thank you so much for this robust engagement, very enlightening indeed.